Hello everyone, my name is Matt Phelan. Welcome to the Happiness Index's ESG and the role of HR. Why are we here? ESG, we've noticed this through conversations, but we've also noticed it in the press and in some of the research that ESG is definitely becoming a business priority. Here's some of the headlines linking it to COP26. Deliveroo's embarrassing stock price slump is a lesson to all companies to treat their workers fairly. So there's a lot happening in the world of ESG, but I thought I would get together a group of experts for us to sort of get under the hood of it. Who are the Happiness Index? So the Happiness Index is an employee engagement and happiness platform. What is it? What's different to other engagement platforms is it brings in the emotional side of business. Which we think is incredibly important. So if you wanted to find any of that stuff out, go to www.thehappinessindex.com. So onto our amazing panel. So I'm Matt Phelan. I am co-founder of the Happiness Index. I don't include myself in the amazing panel because I'm here with Kevin, Emily, and Greg. And I'm going to go in the order of the slides and ask them to introduce themselves. So Kevin, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thanks, Matt. My name's Kevin Withane. I'm the founder of DiversityX, which I hope will be a community for underestimated founders, a provider of capital to support those underestimated founders and a creator of an ecosystem for them to thrive.
Wow. Love it, Kevin. And Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm the ESG coordinator for YouGov, which is a global market research and data analytics company.
Thanks, Emily. And Greg?
Thanks, Matt. Hi, I'm Greg Allen, partner of TPA Capital, a low mid-market UKP firm. I've also got a range of other kind of environmental investments around the world.
Brilliant. Right, let's try and bring everyone back without removing everyone. So if I click stop share, hey, success. Before we get in, I want the audience to get to know you a little bit because if I was being harsh, I'd say they were slightly corporate introductions. So Kevin, I want to know what makes you happy, please, Kevin. Let's get the audience to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah. What gets my kids laughing generally gets me very happy, and just spending as much time as possible with them and my wife.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. Emily?
I'd have to say now that it's getting dark at 3:30 every day, a really good book and a nice cup of tea with a candle going in the evening.
Any book recommendations for us, Emily?
I'm currently reading Invisible Women, which is an excellent book. Not really one to kind of get me in the going to sleep mood. It gets me a little bit more riled up, but it's an excellent read.
Well, by coincidence, Kevin Withane gave me that book as a present, so that's my next up. So I'm a book behind you, Emily. Greg, what makes you happy?
Well, despite living in London, I guess I say getting out into the outdoors. I love running, ultra running, cycling, hiking, ski touring, and trying to work out how I can combine that into my work life is great as well.
Love that. My brain is going crazy with ideas on that, Greg. But we'll come back to that over a coffee. So let's get into ESG, right? I don't know if this is my brain, but I can never actually remember what ESG means. So can I have a volunteer from the group to actually tell us what the E means, the S means, and the G means, just to kick off?
Sure, I can jump in there. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance, and this is a way for companies to express our commitment to operating in a responsible and ethical way, and there's a good deal of accountability there with an ESG framework. So on the environmental side, this is how companies measure their impact on the environment and how we can be a bit more proactive in mitigating that impact. On the social side, that relates both internally in how we support our employees, the policies that we have in place regarding recruitment, retention, promotion, so on, and protections for employees. And then externally, how we interact with the communities that we work in, which will differ depending on the industry that a company works in. And then on the governance side, this is how we ensure that we operate in a responsible way, whether that's through legal or risk evaluation, compliance measures. That's a lot of companies, I think, will already have a strong governance framework, but if you're looking to adopt an ESG framework, you may need to look a little bit closer on the environmental and social sides.
And are they, like we know, Emily, if we're talking about happiness, we know that like employee happiness flows to customer happiness. Are the E, the S and the G, are they supposed to flow between each other, or are they in a random order? Are they all separate? Are they an ecosystem? Are they connected? About 25 questions there.
Sure. I mean, I think it will depend on the company, the business, the industry in terms of how these all interact. So, for YouGov, when we look at the E of ESG, that's very explicitly looking at our carbon emissions, looking at the impact of our data centers, for example, operating in a relatively low impact business, what can we do to be proactive about improving our environmental impact? And that may not relate as directly to the social aspect, although I could go into a lot more detail of how social interacts with environmental just on a global scale. But governance does fit in my experience. Governance does fit in with both of these, and they are aligned, as you said, in kind of a larger ecosystem. The governance component is really fundamental to making sure that the environmental and the social initiatives are actually making the impact that they're set out to do.
That's so useful, Emily. Greg, I just want to bring you in there. I've got a question, but I just want to add a little bit of context to it, which is, why is ESG growing in prominence, which sort of fits to Emily's last point around impact. But like, I'd love to get under the hood of like, is it because people care more, or is it because it's been driven from companies have been forced to do it? Like, why do you think ESG is growing in prominence?
Look, I think it's both. I think people care more, and also, frankly, it's more important from a financial standpoint. So, we've got an aviation advisory business. Our big piece now is looking at, carbon emission calculators and how we can work with airports, airlines, investors into aircraft to ensure that they are investing in the most economical planes, and actually that if stuff's being sent around or people are moving around, it's done in the most efficient way from a carbon perspective. We can't get rid of carbon in aviation at the moment because ultimately we don't have the technology. So let's concentrate on the next maybe 10, 15, 20 years and ensure that we have that right balance. But I think people caring, 10 years ago, I don't think a lot of people really bought into climate change. I think what people have seen in the last 5, 10 years mean they do. And I guess that then ties into the fact that from an investor standpoint, you have the investors into, let's say, aircraft, just to stick on the same topic, who are saying, actually, we only want to invest if we can confirm that what we're investing into is the most carbon efficient type of aircraft. And actually, we're not looking at some of the maybe more historic aircraft, which from a financial standpoint might be more economical, but actually don't work from a carbon standpoint if you want to say that you're being best in class.
Yeah, no, thanks, Greg. And Kevin, I just want to bring you in to link in with the next question, because I know you've been really passionate about showing sort of data and research that shows more diverse and equitable businesses actually are financially better. So I want to bring that into the ESG point. So do you think, do higher ESG scores translate into better business performance?
Is one I'd caveat. I think data suggests, and it's, to be fair, I think relatively early data, because a lot of the work that's been done has only really started in the last 10 years. And probably more recently, probably since about 2015, 2016, there's been much more of a drive. That's not to say CSR wasn't there before. CSR was, but it tended to be much more philanthropic, I'd say, much more, or smaller, much community programs, and not really tied towards the opportunities that it presents businesses. I think sustainability and through ESG presents existing businesses with new opportunities, as opposed to just the challenges they need to overcome. I think the problem is the scorecards lead to a much more reporting exercise of tick boxing. There's no standardization in the industry. There's a number of different standards you can follow as an organization to measure your, to report against what your actions you're taking. I think the problem is that when you spend so much time trying to complete 80 questions, of which the reality is you can't do 80. No organization can take 80, has 80 priorities. It just doesn't exist like that. Even in big multinationals, like no one's resourced to do it. So I think there's too much focus on the reporting, not enough focus on the impact. I do think with the impact side, you'll see real changes, and organizations that do focus on that. And like there are examples out there like Patagonia and Allbirds, just in the fashion industry, which have taken their business and based it around sustainability, and they've been doing it for a longer time.
Yeah.
But they are, they have customer loyalty, they sell premium products at higher prices, and are extremely profitable organizations. So I do think there is opportunity there. I think at the moment though, the numbers are just it's hard to tell whether it's truly successful or not.
So it's interesting you mentioned CSR, because I always think these terms need a rebrand, don't they? Because CSR and ESG sounds like something you've got to go to the dentist for. Like you get called your CSR or whatever. And I know I'm joking, but it sort of misses the impact point, doesn't it, around that, like what you're getting into. Like it's amazing, but it's sort of lost in the business terms.
I think that's a big problem. It is a big problem actually, because people don't understand what it means.
Yeah.
Like even, you've got organizations now which are incentivizing their employees through bonus programs and so forth to try and get some priority given towards ESG. But when you actually ask the people, well, what is ESG? And they can go, okay, it's environmental social governance. So what does that mean for your business? What do you need to do? What can you do? Like, I don't know. And I think a lot of organizations focus on the E. The S and the G seem to be a bit more wishy-washy, hard to grapple with, hard to grasp. But in my personal view, they're the easier things to do.
Yeah.
The environmental stuff is so much bigger and needs a lot more work and analysis and collaboration than the S and the G to an extent.
Yeah.
I think it needs much more education around it.
I think that's going to go to you, Emily. Were you going to add something to that last question?
I think that's just an excellent point. And I think they're just with ESG, with CSR, with D&I, there's these concepts are evolving, the standards are changing so rapidly, and different frameworks may work for different industries or different companies in a different way. Someone may, one company may focus a lot more on their D&I initiatives, which fit in with the S of ESG, but may not have any environmental impact. That may not be an area where they can add the most value. So they may not have been considering ESG as something that they need to look into. But I think there is a lot of confusion, but there's also a lot of interest. I think employees want to know, clients want to know, customers want to know what companies are doing to be better and to do better. And it can be really difficult for companies to catch up with these terms and these concepts that are evolving at such a rapid rate. So
true. And I mean, the question I was going to come to you on that is much of our audience is HR professionals at the Happiness Index. Many of them are our customers. Why is ESG relevant to HR leaders, in your opinion, Emily?
That's a great question. I think, and so my background is in diversity and inclusion. So that's an area where I'm very passionate about, kind of making progress there. And I think there's a lot of diversity and inclusion initiatives will sit within HR. Similarly with ESG, I think particularly where the social comes in, this is where HR can have the biggest impact and should be engaging on a higher level. I think in terms of how why HR should care about ESG. For the ultimate goal is to recruit and retain the best talent, right? And to do that, we need to make sure that our companies are attractive places to work. And as we've been discussing, employees they want to see some commitment from their companies to ESG as a whole, right? They do want to see that environmental consideration as well. But when it comes to the social aspect, it's about the feeling and the experience and the lived experience of employees in their workplaces. I think a lot of companies talk about their culture, and we're looking at culture reporting as kind of an emerging sort of focus. But I think often companies look at culture as, happy hours and holiday parties and, nice snacks in the vending machine. But culture is so much deeper than that. And it's about whether employees feel fulfilled by the work that they do, whether they feel valued by the management team, whether there's a pressure to work overtime, work on weekends, right? Because teams may be understaffed, or people aren't being given the right projects, or work isn't being distributed appropriately. So in terms of what HR and what companies can do with social, it's not just about recruitment practices and promotion practices, although those are absolutely essential to look into. It's also about what the experience is of employees who, once they're in the organization.
Thanks, Emily. And I think on to the next question. This has actually got your name written against it, Greg. It's the only question that's been singled out for someone, which one of the things I found fascinating when we did the most recent round of investment in the happiness index is listening to why people were investing in us. And there was one German investor who actually sent me a note saying that he was taking his money out of Tesla and putting it into the happiness index, which I've got to point out is not a recommendation for anyone here. But the reason he cited is because he didn't believe that Tesla look after their people, and he couldn't have his money helping that company. And this isn't pro or negative for Tesla. That was just a statement that he made on why he switched his money. So I was a bit like, wow, because we'd focused so much on showing people like the business case behind investing, but there was a real social element to it. So the question with your name against it, Greg, is how do investors measure the performance of organizations using ESG scores? Is it talked about much? How's it working?
Yeah, I think we got to the point earlier where we talk about how ESG is going to evolve. What I'm really interested in is how decisions we make now as investors will impact what happens in the future, because ultimately we're going to be judged on the investments we make now in 5 or 10 years time. And whilst there might be elements where nowadays we think actually doing an investment is absolutely acceptable in the current confines, in 10 years time it might not be, and we need to make sure we're thinking about that now. And I don't have a scorecard, but we have some policies as a team. We talk around about businesses and say, well, what does it do? And we met a business a few weeks ago, had a really nice product which they sell, and it really nice margins, really nice way of selling it, great tech. But ultimately, the product doesn't really actually have any benefit to the people who have it. They're buying a product because it's a branded product which they think has a much better benefit than it would have, just factually. And so for us, even though that might be an acceptable investment now, a lot of people invest in businesses which purport to do things they don't do, and that's fine. How is that going to be? How are we going to be judged as a young team of investors in 5-10 years time if actually in the future people go, well, why did you do that deal? Was it just because it was nice and profitable, or actually did you think about it from what the social good of a product was? And I guess across the E, S, and G, that's kind of how we want to think about businesses. Actually take a step away from the numbers and actually meet the team, look at the business, look at the product, look at the customer base, and think, what is this actually doing from an overall perspective? I agree, going through 90 different points probably isn't going to make sense. But for us, it's about discussing, collaborating, and thinking, how are we going to justify this? How do we justify it? What's the worst which someone could say about this business in a paper in 10 years time? And if we can't get happy with that, then we're not going to do the deal. I don't know if
Can I add something on that?
Yeah, go for it, Kevin.
So Larry Fink, BlackRock, he does his letter every year, right, to the CEOs. And I love those letters. In fact, I've used them as examples. Like, look, there are people, investors do care about this. But the problem is with the investment community, and I think it goes to your point, like, how are you going to be viewed? And he's been doing these letters for a while. So it's a good example of, but then I turn around and go, but you're still investing in those companies. You're still invested in those companies and they haven't actually done any change. So what are you doing? It's just a like you're almost greenwashing or diversity washing, which now it makes me question you. Whereas I held you up as, okay, you're like this great investor that's doing stuff. And now it's like, nah, actually, I'm not quite so sure. So to Matt's point, I think I'll pull my money out of BlackRock funds and look for funds that are actually looking at impact, not just a tick the box. Okay, look, this is an ESG. And you can see a lot of funds now. And in what world is ExxonMobil a green company? Like, yes, they're trying to make changes, but they're just bold statements of 20, 30 years in the future, which is wonderful, but we need to see real commitment. And I think that's the problem. And that, going to your point, how are you going to be viewed in 5 years? If you don't think about those decisions at the investment point and throughout that investment journey where you're going to the management team, guys, look, when we invested, these were some of the things that you said you're going to work on. Where are we? Are we making progress? Or rather than 3 months down the line, what's the reporting? What's the financial numbers? Like, it has to be built in. And there's a cost to sustainability, but it's investors driving the management teams to show how the long-term benefits are from sustainability, even though there's short-term gains. And from PE, 5 to 7 years is not quite short-term.
It's such a point, Kevin. And Greg, I just want, it's sort of a personal question really on, because it sounds like the way you describe it, the fact that you're looking at that stuff is supported by your team and your company. But if we go wider, and I'm not asking you to name names, but you can if you want. do you have people that when you're discussed exactly how you discussed it with us, who just go, well, yeah, I mean, there's no point doing that. That's just, I mean, that's not your job, Greg. You're just here to get returns. Like, do you get people who push back on that approach?
Well, look, I think in a lot of funds, ultimately they're driven by, themselves, they're driven by carry, they're driven by financial return. So ultimately they want to invest in businesses which do that. And they're not so worried about, I would say, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't too worried about reputational element or the ESG element. But I think what people have to remember is that for businesses which in 5 or 10 years time are worth more, which is ultimately what you're trying to do in PE, buy a business and then sell it on for more. The way that business is judged in 5 and 10 years is going to be different to now. So whilst a business might grow nicely, actually, the multiples, I think, will start changing when people want to have more allocation into businesses which they can define as ESG. So actually, we should be considering, but actually, you might have a really nice business now which grows at a lower rate, but which has maybe got better ESG credentials, but actually that business will be more valuable in 5, 10 years time than a business which has blown it out, but actually the product isn't there at the end. So I think that's where the short-termist doesn't work. And, we're a long, I say we try to be a long-term, I take a longer-term view on it. And I think that's where maybe the market is different. People are looking for sometimes the kind of short-term wins, but actually there needs to be an appreciation of what's going to be more valuable in the future. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there and just say, I think this also works the other way, is that, there are a lot of investors out there who are really pushing companies to make ESG commitments now. And I think there are some companies that are dragging their feet a little bit and not really recognizing that ESG is something that we need to invest in immediately, because right now, it's still somewhat of an emerging consideration, but 5, 10 years from now, investors from the investment side, it will be so much more important. So companies need to be preparing. So it's sort of on both ends, on the investment side and the company side. We all need to be thinking longer term, but not 30 years long term, because particularly on the environmental side, we do not have that time.
Yeah.
Right. we can't be making changes 30 years from now. We need to be making changes in the next 2-3 years to build on those changes. And so yeah, I mean, it's, I think that the takeaway from both sides here is that we need to be looking at it now.
Yeah.
We also have a demographic moving into leadership positions, much more financially savvy, who can invest in so many multiple ways. Like it isn't a traditional go to your broker and invest now. Like you can literally do it. It's like, no, I'm not going to have Starbucks. I'm going to just stick that money into this company on a crowd sharing site. And it's also changing the way investment's done. And I think that democratization of that is also helping drive it, because ultimately the big investing firms still want to capture that money. And some way to do that is to have allocation dedicated to what those guys are invested in. Example, like, can I name this? Brewdog? I've named it, done it. Literally, you know, that stuff that came out recently about them, and I was going to invest in them, and then that came out and I was like, hold on, let me pull the plug on that before I push send. And it was purely on, that's wrong. Like, I believe in people and treating people with respect and dignity. There's no way, even though they say they've got all these credentials, and they're a B Corp as well. So it's even more disappointing. You know, they're supposed to stand for the stuff that, like, for me, from an investment perspective, I'd invest in, and yet it didn't. So I think there's that opportunity. Like, companies have to be very careful about what they do, saying stuff and then not delivering on it.
I think there's a couple of bits in there. Like, even if you look at the B Corp, so we're on the road to become B Corp, but as an employee engagement provider, like the data in the B Corp bit is like an annual survey, basically. So it's not real time, because employees could have been treated really badly for 9 months and it's not going to show up in a B Corp. So that's part of the fundamental problems. But also, just speaking directly to the listeners for a second, who many are HR buyers, which is, people think about the impact of what you buy from a B2C perspective, aka where do you buy your meat from, where do you buy your vegetables from, blah, blah, blah. But also from a B2B perspective, we're starting to see more buyers say things like, where's the money come from that's been invested in this business? And I would encourage people to keep asking that, because if that's asked of the happiness index, I can give you the names of the 40 people that are invested in the happiness index, and I've met every single one of them. But I know that there's lots of companies that can't actually tell you where their money's come from, their expansion. So I would encourage people to be asking people that they're about to place contracts with, like, who is backing this company? Where is the money coming from? The big example we've seen in football is obviously Newcastle United. Kevin, I'll just bring you onto this. This is something you're passionate about, isn't it? Like, where does the money come from to support? Does that have a role in ESG?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it goes to good governance, knowing your client. I mean, in the financial industry and investment, like, it's pretty strict in terms of know your client. There are obviously issues around that. There are ways to get around it. There are loopholes and that sort of thing. But from just good governance perspective, like, internally, you should want to know that. Like, where is the money coming from? Does this sit well? Is it from political donations, or is there a political angle for this from a lobbying point of view, depending on what products you sell? That's knowing, I guess, knowing your entire ecosystem. Like, you've got to understand, everybody says know your customer, which is very important, but also know your backers, know your shareholders to the extent possible. Like, in big listed companies, that isn't a reality to know everything. You know the big ones, the big players, the 10, 20, 30, 40% holders, but the minutia of investors you won't know. So it becomes really hard. But yeah, I agree.
But I also think this is
maybe just to add to your point, but I think the whole know your client model is wrong at the moment, because really what it is let's find out where this person lives, what they does, and have lots of details into their identity. What we're not looking at is actually what's behind that, and that's where I prefer to see actually a little bit more information, because so much of it now is just lots of documents to prove where and who you are rather than what you are. And actually, I think there should be some types of databases where you can actually check clients, understand where they came from, where their investments come from, where their money's come from, not just, well, they live here and they've done this and we've done a credit check on them, and millions has been spent on that type of work.
And I don't want to turn this into a blockchain conversation, but there is a lot that we can take from that. And this sounds like the crazy story, but I had an argument with a priest about Bitcoin recently, because he was saying to me that Bitcoin is just like the devil's work. But at the same point, with cash, how do you know where that £10 has come from that has gone into the thing at the church? How do you actually know where that £10 come from. So I'm going to not take us down the Bitcoin bit today, but I do think the traceability element is because even Microsoft should, with blockchain technology, be able to show where all their investors come from. It's possible for us to do that. Emily, I want to go to you on the next question, which is, how are an organisation's people strategies measured using ESG metrics? It's quite a technical question, isn't it? But I think it's important for the audience for us to get into that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so there are a range of, ESG metrics and scoring frameworks out there. I think standard metrics around people's strategies may look at existing policies, policy gaps, working conditions, representations. And these metrics will be looking at risk exposure and controversies, particularly around, discrimination, harassment, sort of the getting a bit more into kind of personal experiences. But I think, we've touched on this before. When we're looking at scores and we're looking at metrics, I think it's really critical to not just focus on the numbers. We need to build the narrative and combine sort of a qualitative value with the quantitative values to actually look at how our people are operating and what we can do to support them. So I think ESG metrics can be really helpful, to benchmark where a company stands in terms of our people strategies, but that's not the end. You can look at these numbers and then build on that to say, okay, why does this gap exist? Why are we getting this score here? You have to dig deeper. So I think it's important not to treat metrics as the end result, but more of a beginning to then kind of evolve the strategies in a more supportive and productive way.
I think we see that, Emily, a lot with when we measure things like happiness, and we always say that you've got to look at the metric not like revenue, where if revenue goes up, that's good, and if it goes down, it's bad, because what you don't want is people walking around the office forcing people to be happy, because you start measuring it and you end up with a reverse reality. So the example we use is to see it like a weather report, like it's insight to make better decisions, and that is one of my worries around ESG, is that you end up driving the wrong behaviour, because people are tick boxing, which I know is something Kevin is really passionate to avoid. Looking specifically at cultural health, how is this measured, and why are employee engagement and happiness important? Important metrics. Who wants to jump in?
Yeah. I can jump in, although, I'm obviously very interested to hear what you guys think. I think in terms of why that's important, I mean, we all want to work in an environment where we're happy and we're around happy people, right? That's the ultimate goal, right? But that may look different for different companies. And I think when we're looking at how we're measuring culture and happiness, there are some common ways that companies will do that, engagement surveys or pulse surveys to kind of do more frequent check-ins, climate surveys to look at how teams may be operating. But I think, not to sound like a broken record, right? But we have to be looking at the lived experience as well. And as I mentioned earlier, culture is not just about sort of providing benefits to make people happier, but changing elements of a work culture that may not create a good work-life balance. It's not necessarily about adding, it may actually be about taking something away and supporting employees to be happy in their lives outside of the office environment as well. It's not just about what they're doing when they're, during work hours or in the office or sitting at their desk. We also, an employee may not feel like there's a happy environment if their life outside of work is being severely negatively impacted by the way a company operates.
No, it's so important. I do think it is worth on that work and home life perspective, isn't it? Because that we were even talking about it as founders, and when we're looking at our own financial plans, and we were talking about it this morning, because if you're having a tough time at work, that can lead into your home life. It can lead into things like having problems with your friends or your family because you're overly stressed. And I think we're only starting to scratch the surface on the importance of financial well-being. So I definitely think there's a lot in that piece. Anything to add to that, Greg and Kevin, before we go on to the last couple of questions?
Well, I think when you talk about kind of happiness, it's behaviors which you might think companies are doing to make staff happy, but they're not. You know, we had one business which we know well, and they used to give staff free lunch every day. And when we got involved, we thought, oh, this is a really great thing for business. Actually, then when you talk to staff about it in more detail, you work out actually the reason they're getting free lunch is because people want to stay in the office, work harder, and maybe not leave. So actually, is that the right thing or not? And actually, one of the reasons for different motivations and what makes one person happy is not the same as what makes someone else happy. So I think having a bit of flexibility around the way we look at people, and we don't just try to put one size fits all in for all of our staff, is probably something we need to be better at, because I think at the moment we're missing out in most businesses on that.
It's so true, Greg. That's the confusing perks, isn't it? With like the simple human being things that make us happy, which have been around for thousands of years. Kevin, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think also culture's changing, but the future, like we talk about the future of work, but I think that future is already here. It's just evolving, the evolving way of work. So there's much more hybrid working. There's less tenure. Like when I started out, it was all about sticking with a company, get your head down, work really hard, make your boss look good, and hopefully move up the ranks until you get your pension and happy days. Sadly, I think people of my age probably found out at some point in the last 10 years that isn't the way. There's alternatives and we can do different things. So it's opened up a different opportunities. And I think younger generations are sticking around jobs for the experiences they get from the job, as opposed to the job security and the financial elements of it, which means they want to walk in, feel that they bring something to the table, but they also take something
Totally
as an experience, and then they're going to move on and they're going to build up their work experience through taking these different experiences. So it could actually mean that they're doing many different types of roles and positions, and it's much more fluid. And you look at startups now, and you've got people who are doing completely different roles to, like, you look at their educational background and you go, how the hell did you get into that position there? Like, I don't get it. But they're like, this is what I've done. They can plot a journey and you can go, oh, now I do get it. And I think that's the opportunity. Like that's going to change cultures, because you've got much more transient workforce as well.
Yeah, there's a huge link there to purpose, isn't there? Because I see lots of people of younger generation that work 5+ years in a place, but only if you can show them that the purpose of the business is more than getting a big salary, because there's always going to be someone else that can pay that person a bigger salary. But if you can connect it with what they care about, then that's the difference. Last couple of questions. We've got about 5 minutes left. We're definitely getting more technical as questions go along, which is it possible to find comparable ESG metrics on people data? Who wants to take that beautiful question?
What do you mean by that? I guess.
I suppose, can companies benchmark each other? Can we compare? Can't even say the words, run out of words.
I think when you've got, the thing is with these standards, that's what they try to do. Like they try to give you that opportunity to benchmark against each other. But I think it's really hard because every business is different. And so you've got so they take ISS as one standard. So whatever companies choose to use that, then they can probably benchmark within the different types of sectors those companies are. You could get some benchmarking, but you could be an automotive company, which is really, really small, focused on like the future, mobility as a service. And then you're compared to a GM, which is a completely different model, but you're benchmarking each other and you're the things that go into what make up your ESG score are going to be completely different. So where's the value in that benchmarking? I'm not sure there's even value.
I think that goes back, doesn't it, to what Emily was talking about earlier around just doing these things because it's the right thing to do, not necessarily because we've been told to do it. And in that will come that. Otherwise, you'll be obsessed with benchmarking for the rest of your life.
Which I think is why you should impact, not report. Focus on the impact.
I think you said it earlier. Benchmarking, for me anyway, when we benchmark companies and we look at companies, and we do that really for two things. Firstly, it's actually to have a means to have a discussion, to make sure that as a team, if we're all looking at a company, we will agree with where we say the company sits on various areas. So actually by doing some scoring, we're not going to maybe compare that exactly to another company, but we're going to make sure that we understand, agree where that company sits relative, because everyone's got a different view on who's doing something well versus not. So yeah, I like benchmarking for that discussion. I'm not sure comparing two businesses in different sectors is a way, but I don't think it's not useful, because I think you can use it for, you can use it to see if the company is moving in the right direction over time. As an investor, you can also look at it as I say, as a form of discussion, which I think is where it's most useful.
So
yeah, I also just one last point on that. I think because as Kevin said, it's so hard to kind of compare standards between industries or between types of companies. Any kind of metric on a really high scale where companies can be compared may actually be limiting. So if we look at the reporting requirements for the UK gender pay gap reports, for example, that completely excludes non-binary and trans employees. So we're actively, while I think the looking at gender pay gaps, of course, is an essential piece of data for an organization, both internally and a potential metric to compare between companies. That in itself is actually exclusionary, and so I think that we, again, I think we're all in agreement here. We don't want to put too much focus on these kind of high level metrics without looking deeper and as Greg said, using them more as the start of a conversation.
That is so true, because I was interviewing someone who's now the head of happiness and engagement at the Happiness Index, because obviously we do have someone with that job title, but they had read that we had a 50-50 gender split on our leadership team, which is correct, but she pointed out to me that can be seen as a microaggression for different reasons if you don't identify as male or female. And the brilliant way that she delivered it to me is exactly how Emily decided that she started a conversation with me about it, and then we had a conversation about it, and now we're looking at how we evolve that and how we report it. So I love that. So the final question, right, I already know the answer to, because I've listened to you all for 40 minutes, so I'm going to change it, because the final question is, does ESG present HR with an opportunity to improve the future of work? Yes. That's what you've been saying. So I'm going to ask you to all finish to speak directly to the HR professionals, which is, how can HR people use ESG to transform their businesses? Like, this is the visionary, exciting bit. And everyone processes questions at different speeds. So whoever wants to go first, just jump in, and then we'll go around you. So it's just to reiterate, how are HR professionals going to use this whole ESG thing to really improve the world of work and the businesses they're in?
I guess I can kick off. So I think where ESG can be particularly helpful to HR professionals is, as we've discussed, there's a lot of it can be a big, overwhelming task to figure out how your company or your business or your organization aligns with ethical, responsible, and sustainable operations. It can be, for someone who's just starting out with, maybe you might have had a CSR statement or diversity and inclusion policy, but you want to do more. And ESG presents a framework for, it's almost, kind of a to-do list, essentially, right? there are so many considerations to take into with, figuring out your ESG commitment, but it provides a really valuable framework for solidifying an accountable approach to being a responsible, ethical, and sustainable business.
I'm signed up, Emily. Greg, over to you.
Yeah, look, I'll say, and put a different touch on it. A lot of HR professionals come to us, our businesses, and say, here's a member of staff we're looking at employing. This is what the salary is, and that's the way we promote the job. Saying actually, what's the salary of this person's going to receive, and that's, or maybe the bonus or the carry, and those are the main elements. What we're not saying is actually what's this business going to be doing for you from an ESG perspective, but actually that can stand out on your CV going forward. And I think that's having a focus on that as something which actually you join a company because you get paid well, but also in years to come, that you've worked for a really decent business which has done some great stuff, and it can help your CV as much as anything else. And actually, the focus isn't just on financial, because, and I say this from an investor standpoint, sometimes there's too much focus on salary, bonus, other incentives, and not with the ESG elements, which really matter to some people.
Thanks, Greg. Kevin, you're going to finish us up, and then I'm going to try and summarize what everyone said here.
Yeah, all right. So I think it's use ESG as an opportunity. HR's one of the very few functions in any organization that affects every single person in the organization. So it's a powerful communicator of what ESG is. So if you're a HR professional, learn as much as you can, reach out to experts. There's plenty of groups out there. So do your research, tie it to the company strategy, the people strategy, the social strategy, and the governance strategy, tie it to the exact strategy of the company. So you're not trying to make the company change to fit the ESG, you're making ESG fit the strategy, and that presents opportunities. And a lot of you'll need people to fulfill those opportunities. So it gives you an opportunity to start looking at skill sets, upskilling your employees, but also bringing in a more diverse talent base, whether that's based on gender, race, or just what I like, the cognitive differences, like people with different skill sets, which you wouldn't normally think would be in a role. Like, look at things like that too.
Brilliant. We're out. The questions are out. We need to let all of you busy people get off to your days. I just want to say, I hope everyone who's listening learned as much as I did. Greg, Emily, and Kevin, we've learned so much. If you're looking to measure the S part, many companies are using the happiness index to look at the cultural health. We can help with that. But there are other providers out there. You can go to our competitors. You can go to Glint. You can go to Peakon. You can go to all these amazing companies. But if you want to stop by thehappinessindex.com and have a little look at what we do, that would be awesome. But most importantly, I think the biggest thing that I took from today, ESG has been driven by two sides, people caring about it, and obviously the regulation coming in it. But the biggest thing is not going away. So don't ignore it. Get it to the top of the agenda and take it seriously. So Greg, Emily, and Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.